There can be little doubt that 19th century Whitechapel was a district that was brimful with characters. Aside from its reputation for crime, degradation, and poverty, it was also an area where the rich tapestry of human existence was to be observed in all its glory, both good and bad. Consequently, newspapers across the country were fascinated by the district and its inhabitants, and any story about it was guaranteed to receive widespread coverage across the length and breadth of 19th century Britain. On Saturday the 6th of August 1862, the Lancaster Guardian published the following article: Curious Discovery of a Miser. A few nights ago, a policeman noticed a wretched-looking old man in the neighbourhood of Whitechapel. His appearance bespoke the most extreme destitution. He was dirty and literally clothed in rags, and was apparently borne down by some heavy weight which he had about him. The officer, thinking that the poor creature had some lead or stolen property in his possession, asked him what he had got round his body. The old man declined to enlighten the policeman, and was accordingly walked off to the police station. At first the inspector was almost induced to remonstrate with the officer for bringing such a dirty, wretched outcast to the station, for his filthy rags gave off such an offensive stench as to render his presence quite unbearable. The inspector, however, told the old man that he had better let them know what it was. The old fellow at length muttered out, "Money!" From round his body were then taken several bundles of dirty rags, which were found to contain gold and silver and 5 Bank of England notes to the amount of nearly £200. There was about £100 in silver. The old man said that he had been saving it for upwards of 20 years, and that, as he accumulated the gold and silver, he had secured it in bags, which he placed round his body for safe keeping, and never took them off. For many years he carried clothes for the traders in Petticoat Lane, doing odd jobs and running errands in the streets, and he named several persons who had so employed him. They, on being applied to, confirmed his statement, and as there was now no doubt as to the treasure really belonging to the old man, the police thought of the best way of protecting him, as some of his old employers in Petticoat Lane suddenly became very much interested in his behalf, and proffered their assistance in taking care of both him and his money. He was at last persuaded to go to the Bank of England, but his wretched and offensive appearance, and the process of turning the large amount of silver out of the dirty rags, had such an effect upon the cashiers that they declined to have anything to do with the old man or his cash. The city detectives tried their good offices, and the cashiers were at length induced to receive the silver, there being only 1 bad half-crown amongst the mass, and give the old man notes for the amount. After some further persuasion, the old man was induced to invest the whole of his savings. He was taken to Sir Robert Carden, who undertook to do the best he could for him, and received about £192 from the old man, which today would be worth the substantial sum of almost £30,000. The police then further advised him to have a good wash, and he returned to his abode, but evidently not so well at ease as to the security of his money as when he had carried it about with him. And with that the old man withdrew from the media spotlight to resume his place in obscurity amongst the hundreds, if not thousands, of similar characters who wandered the streets of 19th century Whitechapel. He was not important, and his story, dating as it does from 1862, has nothing to do with the Jack the Ripper atrocities. However, what his brief outing onto the pages of the 19th century newspapers does demonstrate is that there was far more to the Victorian East End than the Whitechapel murders. The crimes didn't take place in a vacuum, but rather they occurred amongst ordinary everyday people whose stories seldom get told and who are now long forgotten, any memory of them tending to be overshadowed by an unknown miscreant whose only real contribution to the 19th century East End was to render its people hostages to terror over a brief period of some 10 or so weeks in the autumn of 1888. For me, however, it is the stories of people like the old miser a man who would rather have wandered the streets with his money, gold, and silver concealed beneath his ragged clothing than entrust it to the safekeeping of a bank that really do bring the streets of Victorian Whitechapel most vividly to life. We don't know what became of him. We don't even know what his name was. All we do know about him is what was reported in the newspapers back in 1862 when he inadvertently attracted the curiosity of a passing police officer. But I do hope that he got to live out his days in relative comfort, and that he did take the police's advice and decide to have a wash, and was able to enjoy the wealth he had built up over his 20 or so years of toiling for the traders on Petticoat Lane. Somehow I doubt it, but whatever became of him, may he rest in peace.